guess that FESSUD and Malcolm precisely invited me to give this speech, perhaps because I come from a different angle, or I look at things from a different angle. And that angle is very much about, if we're going to be talking about restructuring the financial sector to better serve society. It is clearly a prospective question that involves some elements of linking with the other worlds out there. And those other worlds are the world of policymakers, the world of regulators, and obviously the world of financiers as well, which are three worlds I've been involved with to a pretty good extent during the best part of my professional life. The question of restructuring the financial sector to better serve society also fits nicely, I feel, with a number of work packages of this program. Certainly the dissemination work program, and also the foresight one. Where we're going and how do we get our message out there. Clearly, the main questions there are where do we want to go, what for, and how do we get there. In order to treat that question with a little bit of rigor, I would like to define first what I mean by serving society, making finance better serve society. There can be so many definitions. I will give a definition, no ambition to be, saying the truth, but that's the definition I'll be using in my speech. I think there are two dimensions to that notion of better serving society. The first notion is that capital should go to productive use. You can say this is obvious. Yes, in theory it's obvious. It is far from being the case today. I will give a very simple statistics, and we could, give many more numbers. If you look at the total assets of banks in the EU, big number is about 45 trillion euros. Only 28% of that is dedicated to lending money to non-financial corporations and households. Obviously, I'm excluding lending to other financial institutions, but 28 is really going to the so-called real economy. And obviously, we would need to refine the numbers, but that's, I think, a very interesting number. So better serving society is really, in my view, first of all, capital should be going to the economy. Second dimension is that financial system should not hold society as a hostage. In other words, if it fails, when it fails, the entire society should not pay for it. The whole system should not collapse. It should continue to work. Okay, so how do we get organized so that when there is a failure, and I tend to believe there will always be failures, it doesn't take the whole system down. So that's really my two conceptions of having a financial system better serving society. What's really interesting is that, and I think we'll come back to that point later, is that the notion of having a financial system that doesn't bring the economy down when it fails is contained, I believe, in the fact that we bring capital productive use. If we really had a system that is about financing economic activity, the impact of this institution failing or that part of the system having a problem would be much more limited, and we would effectively solve the second problem by solving the first one. Two dimensions to getting to where we want to get. There is the how and there is the what. I will start with the how, if you don't mind. How do we work? What needs to be done in order to get there? In order to answer that question, we should be looking at what I see are the main three obstacles to restructuring the financial system to better serve society. The first obstacle is complexity. And that complexity can be sometimes real, sometimes perceived. But in the debates, this is the argument which prevents policymakers almost systematically from making fundamental decisions. When a debate becomes too technical, too controversial, policymakers simply do not know where the truth is, and they do not feel capable of deciding whether the arguments put forward to them are correct or not. And in the past 4 years, really, I've been doing a lot of work with the legislators and the policymakers in Brussels. And I would say that a significant proportion of them are very honest, hardworking, and I would dare say competent people as politicians. It's their job, or high-level civil servants. Honestly, so many of them, when they hear all the arguments, pros, cons, blah, 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 you debate, they are just lost. And I'm just talking about, I will be talking about second dimension in a minute, which is capture of legislators and regulators, which does exist also. But let's leave that side of the question apart, and that will link to what you at FESSUD are doing directly. The notion of, oh, it's too complex, I don't know, and if I don't know, at the end of the day, I'm not going to be taking the right measures, is something that we should always bear in mind, and it's a very, very important factor. Second obstacle, and I just mentioned it, is the well-known phenomenon of capture of policymakers and regulators by the financial industry. It does exist. There's absolutely no doubt about that. It's not, it's not the only explanation why we haven't done, I feel, what we should be doing, but it's part of the explanations. That capture can take many different forms. It does take different forms in different countries. It can be political, it can be sociological, it can be financial, it can be intellectual. There's plenty of ways by which basically private interests will capture policymakers, which, sorry for stating the obvious, are in charge of public interest, to convince them not to do what should be done for the interest of public, of the public good. So there's plenty of ways of doing that. Very happy to get into the detail of how it happens here, there, in Brussels, in different member states. Less familiar than certainly Jan with the way it's happening in the US, but I have some idea as well. So we can debate that if you wish, but it does happen. What's interesting is that once policymakers have been captured, whatever the reason, the tactics are always the same to make sure that nothing or very little happens. The tactics are changing the meaning of words. I could give you 10 examples of, there was 2 years of discussions about financial market regulation in the European Parliament. Regulation is called MiFID. Okay. The favorite tactic of all those who wanted nothing to happen or as little as possible was to change the meaning of the word. And by the time legislators realize that they think they're talking about something, but they're actually talking about something else, they've lost weeks and months, and at the end of the day, nothing happens. That's one favorite tactic of the financial lobby. Complicating issues and text in order to create loopholes. That's a classic. Classic in the US has been Volcker rule, which started with, I forget, perhaps 20 pages and which ended up being 400 pages. And the way it happened is that you have the lobby saying, oh, you have to make exemptions and carve out and everything, very much like Jan was telling us. And then once it becomes so complicated, the lawyers get into that and make sure nothing happens. And I could give you some anecdotes about that if we have time later. So complicating is a favorite tactic of those who don't want things to really change. Scaring policymakers with the prospect of unintended consequences. When you work in policy-making areas, unintended consequences, when you hear that, the debate is going nowhere. It is, and here again, you scare people. Wow, my God, I might be doing something that has terrible consequences. And obviously you're a policymaker, you've been elected, you're a politician, you're not a specialist. Even if you've been working hard on a specific file, and if you're not stupid, you've learned the basics, oh my God, unintended consequences, do nothing. So that's a big word to block things. And of course the usual threats to grow the economy, financing of pensions of voters, all the usual arguments that are meant to scare policymakers. So all those things happen, and have terrible effect of blocking so many things. And we'll go through the list of what's been done, what's not been done, have we addressed the real issues in a few minutes. And we'll see that, certainly in my view, we've done things. It would be unfair to say we haven't done things, but have we addressed the real issues? Let's keep it for a bit later.